Innovation. Now, isn't that a beautiful word? Before I start, I would like to ask you a question. Who of you here tonight, and raise your hands if that's you, would like to be called an innovator? An innovator. Most of you, if not all, would go directly to prison for the rest of your lives and have both of your ears cut off if this were medieval Europe. Because in medieval times, being called an innovator was actually being accused of being an heretic. And the ears you listened with were seen as a source of evil. Now that, thankfully, is a very long time ago. But it wasn't until the early 1900s before innovation got to mean something positive, something new, something novel, something we should wish, we should strive for, we should want. And it actually wasn't until the 1930s before innovation received the definition that we still use it mainly with today. And that definition goes a little something like this. Innovation is what happens when firms figure out how to turn inventions into constructive changes in their business models. Now think of that for a second. In other words, innovation has primarily something to do with money, business models. Now, for the last decade, I've been working on making innovation happen. And for most of that time, I, just like most innovation researchers, managers, and consultants, have been looking at research and businesses as the main sources of innovation. But that changed 3 years ago, when I realized that there's a profession, that there's a group of professionals out there that is actually trained to have what it takes to be an innovator in the 21st century. Now, wouldn't that be great? Because since the 1930s, almost everything around us has been updated. The definitions have been changed. Everything has changed. But the definition for innovation is still the same. Now, isn't that strange? And I believe it is time to update our definition for innovation and take innovation itself into the 21st century. Now, this group of professionals that has what it takes, they have been trained from the beginning of their studies to do to develop extraordinary creative thinking skills, to turn every invention completely inside out and to make it do things and see possibilities that none of us see. Just like Raphael Rosendahl, who makes websites that contain no information whatsoever. Now, this is a group of professionals who continuously experiments and prototypes their way into new solutions. Just like Tiwani van der Horst, who built her own 3D printing arms to be able to paint in 3 dimensions. And this is a group of professionals who has the freedom to reflect on the impacts innovation could have not only on ourselves, but also on our global environment. Just like Ruben van der Ven does when he is working with facial recognition software systems. Now, do you have an idea which group of professionals this might be? They are artists. They are artists. But let's step back for a moment and consider innovation literature, because we started this off with innovation. If you look at innovation literature and what has been written about the patterns leading to innovation, most scientists agree there are at least a few. And 2 of the most agreed upon patterns for innovation actually overlap with what we just saw artists are trained for to do. It is having extraordinary creative thinking skills, just like Raphael Rosendahl with the websites, and making sure that you have space to experiment, space for an experimental attitude, just like we saw Tiwani van der Horst. The new thing, however, is the reflection part. Now, if we chose to update our definition of innovation and take innovation itself into the 21st century, we need to find a way to include sustainable, societal, ecological, and ethical impacts into the equation next to the business and economical impacts. And I believe making reflection a central theme and a central source for innovation, could do just that. Now let me show you some examples. Imagine this was the early 1990s. We're back in the early 1990s. Internet has just arrived, and cell phones look more like suitcases than anything else. You couldn't have them with you in this room. At that time, there was an artist in Spain thinking why it is that screens have to be flat and thick. Why can't they be flexible, rollable, bendable? And so he set out and made the world's first flexible screens. In a world where no firm saw any business opportunity whatsoever to make screens flexible. Or imagine you could fly across the Atlantic Ocean on nothing else than the heat of the sun, the power of the wind, and the gravity of the earth below your feet. No fuels, no motors, no heaters. Argentinian artist Tomás Saraceno imagined just that, and he set out to experiment towards his goal, ultimately succeeding and making it possible to have a balloon fly from New York City to Berlin, not impacting the world whatsoever, but actually collaborating with what it has to offer. Now, is this an innovation? If you would consider the now more than 80-year-old definition of innovations having to do directly with economic impact and business models, probably not, as it took this poor guy underneath his balloon 6 days to reach Berlin. Not exactly a constructive change in the business model for the aviation industry, is it? But what if? What if we would use our updated definition for innovation, and we would include societal, ecological, and ethical aspects just as much as we would include economic interest? Then most certainly yes, this is an innovation. And we should reward not only this artist for showing us that it is possible, but any company, any firm out there who decides to further develop this and to constructively change the world for the better. Now, what I just showed you were some quite recent examples, but actually this is not a new thing. This is not something that happened just last few years. Artists have been proving to have what it takes to come up with the ideas, the experiments, and the reflections that we so desperately need for new innovations, all the way back to this man, Leonardo, from a little town in Italy called Vinci. Now, Leonardo da Vinci, some 500 years ago, already wrote down the most interesting, innovative ideas around new construction materials, flying machines, and even robotics. However, it took more than 300 years before his ideas were put into innovations. But something interesting has been happening over the last half decade. And that is that the time between artists innovating and companies, firms, organizations basically redoing the job is becoming shorter and shorter. For example, the first QR code was a painting made in the 1960s by a Dutch artist called Pieter Struiken, redone by a Toyota affiliate in the 1990s, some 30 years later. And the flexible screens of Daniel Canogar, that no company saw a business model in, being redone as we speak by Samsung and put on the market later this year or early next. Now, I could go on all evening with examples like these, but let's stop and consider for a moment, if this is what has been happening, what artists all around the globe today are innovating in fields where we so desperately need more responsible and new innovations. Fields like bioengineering, printing, blockchain technologies, and robotics, and many others. What they are doing is they are generating the ideas, they are conducting the experiments, and they are reflecting on the possible outcomes. But, there is a but that is not going to be enough to update our definition for innovation and take it into the 21st century. Because for that to happen, we also need innovation researchers to include art into their analysis. And we need policymakers to include art into their planning. And we need innovation managers to include art into their funnels. And only then can we update our definition of innovation and take innovation itself into the 21st century. Innovation. Now, isn't that a beautiful word? Thank you.